The other thing to see on this graph is that a few of the bulls did very, very well. The Garrett bull, the Beacon bull, the McCormick bull are still in the top 10 after they had their daughter Proof. But a couple of those bulls fell quite a bit, and the bull there in the 9th line just barely made the top half after he added the daughters. So again, if you're going to use them as mating sires or even in your herd, it goes back to that same message you've heard me say repeatedly: spread your risk out. Don't get overly excited and overuse these young sires too much. Now, compared to proven bulls, because that's the other option we could have been using, rather than these 10 highest ranking young sires, let's go to, say, a pool of 4 of our highest proven bulls. Their average was 1884. They were about 100 TPI points lower than the young sires at that time. So again, the temptation is, well, we should be using the young sires and not the proven bulls. But as we've already seen, we see this softening yet happening. And by the time we have the daughters on those young sires, these bulls actually were stable, and thanks to the help of Schottel, had actually gone up a little bit and ended up at a higher value than those other bulls. So there's no right or wrong answer. It all is a matter of how you manage your risk portfolio and what proportion you want to use on any of those genetics. But keep in mind, there does seem to be not as much diversity, and that's what I'm trying to show here. One of the things we do is we ranked the bulls in the industry from the USDA evaluations on their genetic merit and say, okay, these are some that we want to use as sires and sons. Well, what started to jump out at us, well, the pedigrees were all the same. And so we went to some kind of a color coding that if it has Planet or Oman or Schottel or Goldwyn, so that it kind of jumped out at us. Well, it gets to be pretty dense on the yellow. And now the Freddies are just coming in, and we do see an awful high representation of just these few sires. So it hasn't been easy for us to find that outlier, unique genomic animal to use in the breeding programs yet. So genetic diversity is a little bit of a concern. There is a place for these high genomic young sires in our breeding programs, but the proven bulls are still a viable option. And we shouldn't forget that they're more stable, and these young sires tend to come back closer to their range after we get daughters on those young sires. Now, the last part of the program that I wanted to do is just thinking what are some of the options on the female side and how we might use that for herd improvement. And to start that discussion, we have to look at costs, because the first tool that we had that's been used very extensively has been the Illumina 50K chip. And that's been kind of the state of the art that most people have been using. And the cost for that back in 2008, back in the United States, was around $220, sometimes $250. But that cost has come down precipitously. And now we are able to do our genotyping on the 50K chip in the United States for about $85. So that's much, much more affordable than what we had even just 2 years ago. One of the tools that came out is the 3K chip. It's much less dense, and therefore what we had hoped is that it would be lower cost, and that would be an opportunity to do even more widespread screening. That was introduced last year. I won't go into a lot of details on it. It's had its problems. It's not performing in the lab as good as what we would like. They're working on some redesigns for it. It's a bit more difficult test to be running. And now with the cost of the 50K coming down so much, I'm not sure where the place for the 3K is. How it's being used from a genetic evaluation standpoint is that you have more spread out markers, but as long as parents to those animals or other relatives have been done on a 50K, you can fill in the gaps and impute it up to, say, a more dense genotype. And that's how that information is being used in the breeding values calculations. Now, there is other options as well, and Affymetrix and Illumina both have 600, 800, 1,000 K options on genotyping. And if you really want to do it, you can do full sequencing for a few $1,000s. So there's lots of options out there on how you want to genotype. But I'm going to go back here now to this 3K option because that was one that we had hoped is maybe an option to do some more work on a herd basis. When you look at the increases in accuracies or reliabilities that you get when you go from just a straight parent average, where we're going to say this is milk yield, the reliability for parent average without any genomics has been about 35%. If we use the 3K results, that accuracy goes up to about 63% compared to, say, the 50K results, which are closer to 70%. We don't have a lot of data yet, so we can't really use real live data on the 800K because we don't have that many animals in the system yet. So this is more on simulation where you get the increases there. But maybe a little surprisingly, we don't see a lot of increase in accuracy as we go from the 50K to, say, something like a 500K or an 800K. And this is, I think, in part because of the pedigree structures that we're working with in cattle like Holsteins or Jerseys. You only get 1 or 2 crossovers per chromosome per generation. And most of what is inherited is in these great big strands of DNA. And when you've got the 50K, you've pretty much got everything already identified because the 800K didn't give you a whole lot of additional information. You already know that this strand was from Elevation or this strand was from Chief or something like that. So that's been a little bit of a challenge and creating lack of motivation to want to spend all this extra money to do high-density genotyping when you don't get a whole lot more accuracy than this coming down price on the 50K. So the 3K did give you about 80% of the gain in accuracy compared to the 50K, but you got almost all of it when you went from the 50K to the 500. So now what I'm going to take a look at, and this is actually some work that Tom Lawler from the Holstein Association did. He went to a herd in New York that had done quite a bit of genotyping, and we had 50K results on over 2,000 animals. And then we looked at what it would be if we had 3K results on, and we did some 3K results on that herd as well. And then tried to play around with some various scenarios as to, well, what does this possibly mean for my breeding program? So you can get your pencil out and try to do some calculations and stuff, and that's really what it ends up coming down to, because the cost for this genotyping, if you do it on a lot of animals, it can run up pretty expensive in a short period of time, so you got to make sure that, in fact, you're getting your money's worth for what you're doing. So let me step through this example, and there's many examples you can play around with. But if you say you had the opportunity to cull the bottom 10% of your herd, so you want to make sure you're going to keep the 90% that are the best animals, okay? And how can I use the 3K chip to help me do that? Well, the net merit dollars, which is similar to a TPI in the United States, the type production index, it's an overall economic index, not that dissimilar from an APR here, and it's based on lifetime net merit, so it's an economic value of the animal. And so that's the trait we're going to look at, is net merit dollars. And the average for the top 90% on their 3K results was the $365. The average for all of the animals was $328. So by selecting the top 90% based on the 3K, that was about $36 improvement. That's a transmitting ability. So I actually have to multiply that by 2 because the animal's own performance, if you will, is double her transmitting ability. So they were $72 better than the average for the group. I've got 90 of them, so I multiply the $72 by 90, and that's a $6,500 improvement in their merit that they can bring to the herd. Well, if I tested these animals using the, say, $40 3K chip on the 100, that was a $4,000 investment. Therefore, I got a good return on my investment of a little over, right around $2,500. However, that's what is the incremental gain compared to some other options that might be out there. Because don't forget that we already have information that may be free, and let's take advantage of all the free information we have before we start spending money on some of the other things. So if you're interested enough in knowing what the genomics are, you probably know the pedigrees, that you would know what the parent averages are. So if you actually looked at what is the average for the traditional parent average on the top 90%, well, that was 357, so nearly $30. And then you got a little bit more improvement if you wanted to fine-tune it with the 3K results, and even more, of course, if you wanted to go to the 50K results. But the incremental improvement above traditional parent average was only about $7. So now if you go through your calculations of the breeding value contribution of that, you double it, so you're at about $14, and multiply that times your 90 animals again, it's at $1,224. However, if you spent $4,000 on a 3K chip to get that last $7, you actually have lost money, okay? So you've got to really work through and be cautious about jumping in up to your waist and doing lots of genotyping without really checking to see are there some other options that might be helpful. And you can go through lots of scenarios here. The more intense you do your selection, the genotyping obviously becomes more and more important. And if you're going to be making a decision on a heifer or a cow to flush, then you may want to make the investment to do the genotyping. And I guess at this point in time, I would recommend you would use something like the 50K chip because of the added accuracies that you can get, and the cost difference isn't that much. But for whole herd usage on the 3K, it's a little difficult for me to see how that used. You have to start working with, I think, some subsets of data to make it work. So that is really the key messages I wanted to have in this presentation. Going back to the title, is genomics really the shiniest new tool in the toolbox? Well, it is a new tool, and it's a shiny tool, and it may in fact even be the shiniest tool. But we're in the infancy of this. We're learning a lot. The information is coming fast and furious. We're trying to make the right decisions on how to apply this to our breeding programs, how farmers can use it to maximize their profits. And so there's a lot of information that's going to be coming along. We need to be careful about comparing across age groups. We need to be concerned about some inbreeding concerns if we overemphasize just the genomics, unless we can get some things sorted out as to why that is all happening. So with that, I will close and open it up for any questions there might be.
Thank you very much.